Okay, so this playlist will give you in order the segments that compose the first lecture on divine command theory. And I should tell you at the very beginning of this lecture that the lectures that I give on divine command theory are going to be more comprehensive in nature than the chapter that you read in Rachel's textbook. And it'll become pretty apparent just as we go through the basic outline of the lecture why that is. So when people talk about this argument that was given by Plato a very long time ago, and that has been revisited by philosophers and theologians for centuries and centuries afterwards, the main focus that people usually have has to do with one set of problems, namely, what's the source of moral authority, and can a deity be the source of that moral authority? Can our norms get their authority, their normative nature, by being dictates of a deity? But I see two important and related problems that emerge in this literature, and I want to cover both of them in the lectures. So we do have this problem about moral authority. There are really sort of two important questions about moral authority that the Euthyphro, Rachel's discussion, and divine command theory generally look at. First of all, what gives our moral norms authority? Now, divine command theory provides us with one answer for that question. And there's another question we want to consider as well. Why ought our actions be bound by moral norms? So why is it that we think the way that we behave ought to be guided by norms, rules about how people should behave generally? And so divine command theory tries to provide a set of answers to those questions. But there are other questions as well, and these questions are epistemological in nature. So the first set of questions are largely questions about metaphysics and ontology. What's in the world? How does the world work? So what is it about the world that gives moral norms authority? Why is it that moral norms have this property that they should guide our actions? The questions about and problems with moral knowledge have to do with how we can go about knowing moral norms, how we can gain moral knowledge. So how can we know what norms are the correct moral norms? That's an epistemological question. It's a question about how we can come to know something. And where should we seek moral knowledge? This is also an epistemological question. It questions what's the source? What sources can we consult if we're looking for moral knowledge? And in my view, all the way back to the Euthyphro, the discussion deals with all four of these questions. And so I want to go through this material, and I'll be deviating a little bit from Rachel's text to talk about all these questions, whereas Rachel's text focuses primarily on moral authority and a special emphasis on the relationship between religion and ethics. So one set of answers that has been given in history is that moral authority issues from proclamations, commands of a deity or deities. And this view has come to be known as divine command theory. So we'll look at divine command theory as an answer to that first set of questions. How do norms get moral authority? Why should we adhere to moral norms? Answer: deity gives commands. Those commands get their authority from the deity itself, and because the deity has authority over us, the norms have authority over us. It also gives us answers to, or appears to give us answers to, these moral knowledge questions. Right? One can unproblematically learn one's moral norms by consulting the appropriate religious text or by talking with the appropriate religious teacher. Right? Now, this lecture is a little whimsical. It's from over a decade back, but it's still quite relevant and useful. So Tommy the Two-Headed Turtle here is going to tell us about the two theses of this lecture on divine command theory. So first, we're going to discuss whether or not one's God is properly understood as the dictator, the commander of moral norms, or as the reporter, the entity who sees what the moral norms are and then reports them to us. And these two roles are quite different from each other, and you can't have both roles at the same time. And this will be part of the problem that Plato and other writers raise for divine command theory. Secondly, we're going to discuss whether or not you can simply learn morality from a book or authority, like reading the Bible, the Book of Mormon, the Quran, and so on. And I'll then go on in the next lecture to generalize the things that we learn in this lecture to rule of law, to civic authority as well. So the first question we might ask in deciding whether or not evil scientist Bart's actions with regard to subject Homer are moral is morality simply what God says is right or what God commands? Or is morality what God reports? Is morality something that God sees and doesn't make a choice about, but merely reports to us? Okay, and this is the essential question that Plato asks about the pious man and the euthyphro. Okay? And the answer that's often given in religion, all religions, and it's important to remember that Plato wrote the euthyphro hundreds of years prior to the birth of Christ, so it's not engaged with Christianity per se. Right? But the answer that's often given by religious or pious people is that God makes things right by willing that this is the right action, or wrong by willing that this is the wrong action, and he or she or it has the power to do that. In the case of the Christian God, they're all powerful, they're omnipotent, and so whatever they will is reality. And this theory about the source of moral authority of norms is called divine command theory. And it has attractions as an answer to this question about how norms get their authority. But it also has problems. And Plato and philosophers and theologians that follow spell out and try and dispel these problems. So divine command theory is attractive in a way because it makes ethics easy. So you want to know what's the right thing to do, well, you do what God says. If you want to know why that's the right thing to do, it's because God says it's the right thing to do. So divine command theory, in a way, simplifies our moral or ethical choices and reasoning. Divine command theory also has the attraction that it renders sort of unproblematic various prima facie morally questionable acts by various religious deities. So, for example, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, right, the plundering the Egyptians or preparing to sacrifice one's son, the plundering of the Egyptians occurs in Exodus, sacrificing one's son occurs in Genesis, right? These are acts that are commanded by or enacted by the Judeo-Christian God that don't look very morally praiseworthy. Right? So asking Abraham to sacrifice his firstborn son, that seems like a kind of, I don't know, what do you want to say, awful move. Seems like the sort of thing that a terrible person would ask, not the sort of thing that we'd expect the divine moral commander to command. But on the divine command theory, these acts aren't morally wrong, even if they may seem like it, since what's morally wrong is what God wills to be morally wrong, and what's morally right is what God wills to be morally right. Thus, if God commanded them, they are morally good by default. So, In the next section, we're going to start with the objections to divine command theory, and we'll see why it is that people have found this view so problematic, given its attractions.